is called, well, you can see it, Leadership by Rande Somma, who was the president pretty much in charge of all of JCI, Johnson Controls, which was basically one of the biggest auto parts maker in the world, I believe. I don't know if it's anymore, but at one point it was. And for 3 years, he was head of the pretty much all of the worldwide operations or president of the company. And, you know, he doesn't go into why he was fired, but in the 3, 4 years he was in charge, they had record profits and everything because how we led the company, how we looked for the future, and how we pretty much avoided any short-term view, always looked at the long-term view. And then he goes into all the big three, their inefficiencies, how they're so short-term focused and so numbers focused. And thereby, that's why their products were so crappy. We all know, US automakers at one point anyway, now they're a little bit better, way better than it used to be. They were really crappy cars. And that's why the Japanese automakers came and like took over, and the European, so on. And he clearly goes into how much Toyota was easier to work with, not only pricing wise and everything wise, relationship wise, versus any of the big three. The big three were treating them like essentially like the cash machines. Like they were trying to undercut them as much as possible instead of the quality. So they were bottom line looking at the numbers. So that's one. And he also goes into other companies. Like one of the famous examples of his whole point about leadership is Jack Welch. Jack Welch is the one who started the whole. I mean, he was considered one of the greatest leaders, but more you dig into it, you find out he was one of the worst possible leaders. Not as in, as far as a long-term vision and treating employees right and treating the company right. Because once he took off, the whole thing fell down. We know where GE is now. That's because Jack Welch wasn't looking at long-term. He was just looking at bottom line numbers, making sure the numbers are met and it looks great on the Wall Street. And that's his whole point, Randy. His whole point is too much of the leadership, including the political leadership now and before, I mean, for a long time now, is always looking at short-term benefits. And they can't go into the essentially, other than their word base, they don't go into the future. And that's why where we are now with the huge deficits and the debt the country is in, kicking the can down the road constantly. As long as they get elected, they're all good, right? That all they care about is power, right? And that's why you see many of these leaders, oh, we're doing good for the people, protect the people. We can't cut this cost. We got to keep everybody. I mean, I would say 70-80% of us know that's BS, bullshit or leadership, because all they care about is his vote bank, just keeping their votes and not thinking about the future of the country and thereby the kids, the kids now growing up and the future kids and future generations. So that culture has permeated on entire US or entire world mostly. I don't, he goes into the US, but I think it's the entire world. Most of the world is that way. All the leaderships, government itself. I've not seen a government other than maybe some the benevolent dictator types I've seen that are rulers who think about their seems like their future, country's future, would delve into fiscal responsibility and long-term future of the country. But that's besides the point. The point about this whole book is the leadership is he goes into, how the big three destroyed the whole companies, how UAW played a big role because it's the same thing. UAW leadership, all they cared was their benefit, essentially more memberships and more dues. So thereby, they get more money and their employees get more money, regardless of how eventually viable the whole company was. If you don't think about the company and you just want money, more money, thinking that somehow you making more money will make the company viable, that's not how it works. But then it's the same thing with the big three. How they work is they don't care. It's the numbers. As long as you're making the numbers, however you make it, the rules don't matter. Whatever you need to do, just make the numbers. Right. Anyway, the point about this book is it goes into length about how the whole leadership in corporates and the government is completely upside down. Everybody looking for the short term. They're not evaluating the person properly, instead just looking at their record as far as the numbers they made. And they're not, thinking about the personality, how they lead people, how they empathize with people, and how you should care about the employees and thereby the future of the company. Now he at the same time, he's not talking about not laying off or, completely employees at all, like some people say. No, I mean, at times it might be needed because whatever happens, the company viability is the number one thing. And if you are forced to, you could. That's not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is when people are just laying off left and right people just because the numbers look good, Wall Street is happy, investors are happy, so on and so forth, instead of thinking about the future of the whole company and thereby essentially taking care of the employees. And that's why the whole gig economy exists now. There's no loyalty with any company because the companies are not loyal to employees. If the employee, companies are not going to be loyal to the employees, why would the employees be loyal to the company? It's a two-way street. He also goes into the CEO compensation. I felt it's a bit too much on that one because I don't agree with him on the compensation issue he has with the CEO compensation because it's a very hard job and very stressful job and very few people can do it. So I feel like it's consumerate with that. But there are points he makes about that, about the bonuses, which are more short-term focused than long-term focused, which I agree. Maybe that's something has to change about the CEO compensation, where the bonuses are tied to the future. Like even after they leave the company, has to maintain for a certain length before they get their bonus. That seems like a great idea to put in for all the big companies so that, CEOs don't do this short term, just kill the golden goose, for the eggs it can give now instead of thinking about the future. I don't know what you can do in politics there, but politics, unfortunately, people buy into platitudes and for the people, people don't, too emotional. People buy into the hype more than actually looking at the facts. It's what it is. So, we all get caught up in it, including me. So, anyway, great book to read about that, how, the whole leadership culture in US, but I believe it applies to the entire world. It destroys whole companies and economies in that sense. And very few companies do well with the leadership factor, the CEOs who are running the companies great, but also treat employees great, all that stuff, who sustain for the long term. So those companies sustain for the long term. Anyway, I would highly recommend reading Randy's book.